Everybody should get a notice saying, yes, it's okay for you to record. We like to record our lunch and learns. We like to share this back to all the attendees, and then we like to share this with other groups who are interested in the same information. So welcome everybody. My name is Sarah Richardson, and I am the program director for the Great Neighborhoods program here in Rockford. If everybody wants to say hello in the chat and just say kind of what your name is, maybe what neighborhood you live in, that would be great. I know I always find it interesting to see who's all in here, especially as the screen changes and then we can't see everybody anymore. So feel free to say who you are in the chat and absolutely put any questions you have in the chat. And again, we will offer opportunities to ask questions of our speakers. All right, so today our Lunch and Learn is about neighborhood history and architecture, and we have some really great speakers lined up for you guys on what that means, why is that important to you, and resources you can learn about so that you can also embark on your own journey to learn about your neighborhood history. Again, everybody is muted right now, and please stay muted until it is your opportunity to speak or ask questions. You can also ask questions in our chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well. We'll have some Q&A at the end, and at one point we were going to have a raffle for everybody, but we're not going to be able to do that for this one, so I do apologize about that. For those of you who do not know who we are, Great Neighborhoods is a project where we help bring neighborhoods together and help them understand who they are, what they have to offer, and really help empower them to work together on shared goals and actions. We also work to promote neighborhoods through marketing and branding initiatives too. So if anybody is interested in doing their own neighborhood work, that is why we exist, and we'd love to help you with that. Here are just a few different ways that we help neighborhoods in their goals and activities. We help define themselves geographically. We help them discover and understand their identity. We help promote that neighborhood pride. We help them identify all the strengths and assets they have in their neighborhood. We help create goals and plans. And again, these goals and plans are what the neighborhood want. It's neighborhood driven, not Great Neighborhoods driven. We also help develop marketing and branding strategies. We see ourselves as an outlet to communicate information and resources to our neighborhoods. We help organize and connect neighbors. We support neighborhood activities, and we provide education and training. So those are just some of the key highlights. We remain flexible in whatever neighborhoods want and desire, and we help work through that with you guys. So getting started, I am going to pass the microphone over to Gary Anderson. He's going to provide a much larger introduction and kick off the Lunch and Learn. Gary?
Hey, thanks, Sarah. So you got the presentation up there?
Yep, I will.
You want to bring that up? While she's doing that, we're going to be talking about architectural styles. And, you know, sometimes people want to know what the style of their home is, and sometimes it's pretty difficult, but I will point out today some of the characteristics that we're all, you know, maybe want to know more about. And you can see how some of the styles get mixed at the end of the presentation. I kind of go over a few of those things as to what are some of the elements that kind of detract from that so-called pure style that we all expect to see in our homes, and it's not there. Very rarely do you find a home that is really, truly to a particular style. Okay, first slide, or you want to go to the slideshow?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't want to go into slideshow presentation right at the moment. Hold on one second for me, please.
Okay.
We have multiple. Okay. Let's do it this way.
Okay. One of the things, and I've kind of put in some of the dates here on some of these photos about the periods and what they were typically, and I'm using it more from a Rockford standpoint. So the Greek Revival really was popular in the 1840s, the 1850s in Rockford here. And really one of those good examples, the Greek Revival is kind of like the gable roof with the returns on the fascia. That is very clear here in what was the brewmaster's house. This house was built around 1842, right in front of the Prairie Street brew house. And kind of taking some of the classical Greek Revival styles, it was kind of like looking like a Greek temple. And so there's a lot of little variations of that. But in this particular case, this is one example of that. Next. And then we have I'll say the modified Greek Revival, which is a very simple gabled roof. But there are a number of things that have been added on to a home over the period of the years. In this particular case, this house was built in the 1860s. It did not have a front porch on it. And also the dormer was added later on. Certainly some of the characteristics of the windows up on the second floor. They try to reduce the height of these homes sometimes for tax purposes, but the taller windows certainly to help with the ventilation, and that very characteristic. Next. I'll be talking about some of the changes in the porch styles that occurred over the years too as we get into this. This Italianate style, this is from the 1860s, 1870s. It was very popular. And really kind of off of the Italian villa, very low slung roofs, brackets underneath the eaves, the arched windows above the windows. And in this particular case, it also had the coins on the corners and the accentuation of a different color brick above the window on the window head there, which is the top part of the window. And also with a wraparound porch that was very characteristic. Many times they also had cupolas on the top, which was what they called a widow's walk. In this particular case, that was not the case, but they did have some flat roof areas that would have been able to put one up there. Next. And then we ended up getting into the Carpenter Gothic, which was also popular in the 1860s to the 1870s. In this particular case, the very steep roofs, but the barge boards really kind of accentuate what we call Carpenter Gothic, in which there was a lot of detailing and scroll work that was done by carpenters, hence the name. And you also would end up getting at the peak of the windows there, the triangular windows. That was very characteristic. This happened to be the home of Rockford's first mayor here. And this is around 1840s when this was 45, I think it was 44. But there's a lot of subsequent additions and modifications to the home. So this is not what it looked like originally. In fact, it was about a quarter of the size of what you see here. Next. This is another Gothic revival. You can see where the barge boards are very ornate, and I'll show another example. But in this case, they use brick masonry as well, and the dormers, kind of really penetrate into the roof line, and then you end up getting also some of the details that have become very ornate in the gabled portion. Sometimes we ended up, calling that a variety of names over the years. But the more important thing here is we see almost some of the Carpenter Gothic with the barge boards on the larger gable there. Next. And here's a Gothic or a Gothic revival, almost Victorian period. It's kind of a mix and match. You end up getting the fleur-de-lis up there in the gable and the arching that was very typical of the Gothic revival and the bracketry. I think one of the things here is to point out that some people sometimes will end up paint one color on a house, and in this particular case, it's black, which really covers up a lot of the architectural details. Our Victorian and Gothic homes were very, very colorful, and the use of multicolors to embellish not only the architectural details, but the flourishes of the time. The same thing happened in the Queen Anne period that there was a use of a lot of color and really created a lot of excitement in a neighborhood. Steep roofs were also the triangular windows, as I said before, and also the use of towers there, which became a very much of a Victorian element. Next. And here we get into the Victorian period, in which, again, we get into the steep, and you get the Gothic influences that we were just talking about there, up in the gable of the roof, the dormer penetrations, and also you end up getting what we call a crusting on the top of the roof or on the edge of the roof, usually at the on the ridge of the roof to add more decorations. A lot of times that was done not only in wood but also in sheet metal. Very popularized, and you can see on the bay windows here and also on the porch that kind of what we call crusting. That was also an architectural element. And the use of round porches, which was really the beginnings of the Queen Anne influence as well. And the bay windows were very much part of the Victorian palette in terms of design, and the paired windows as well. Next. And here we get into the more and not so much simplified, but it is simplified from the last one in the Victorian. You can see the bay windows there, the sharp pointed roof, and even on the gables, I'll say the detailing on the barge boards become a little bit more detailed. And even in the attic, the little windows also have a decoration. I think you'll find that above the paired windows, there's this point of detail very much as part of the window head design, that also had a little detail in the triangle that embellished things. Yeah, thank you. And then in the porch details, the use of brackets, the influence there of the Italianate period. We ended up borrowing really a lot of styles from previous periods. And as you'll see in some of these things, some people got really carried away with that borrowing of different styles. Next. Here's the Queen Anne period. In this particular one, the use of arches, and also the use of really a lot of organic forms, such as flowers, leaves, and the detailing. One of the really strong characteristics that you see in the one gable there was the use of the sunbursts. That was very typical of a Queen Anne style, the bay window, which became part of a tower design also in many homes. And in this particular case, it also, the porch extended over to the carriage drop off. And hence you can kind of get out of your carriage and walk right across onto the porch and into the house without having to step down. The other thing, when you look at limestone foundations in Rockford, anything prior to 1900 was built with limestone foundations. Anything thereafter were either poured concrete or concrete block, which was a later thing. But the limestone really was pretty predominant up until 1900. And you also can see here the difference, or the change from the stone foundation to the body of the house, in which we have a water table there to help shed the water away from the limestone face of the building. The carpenters, the design of these buildings were, everything was for a purpose. Even the tall windows being double hung, they helped with the ventilation, getting the hot air out of the house prior to air conditioning. Next. In this particular house, this had the use of the fish scale siding that ended up separating the upper story from the lower story. Sometimes they ended up changing the clapboard siding to a shingle style up on the top, but you can also see the organic forms in the triangle that you see in the bay, or the dormer window up there, and also the use of brackets there. And again, the use of chimney design were also another decorative element. The front porch design, a lot of people were adding porches and larger porches to take advantage of being neighborly, and also to relax out on the front porch, put a hammock out there, or just as a gathering place, because it was sometimes cooler, certainly in the summertime, to be able to gather out on a front porch. And the porch became very popularized and bigger, especially after the World's Fair in Chicago, where they started adding the classic revival porches. Next. And this particular house is a Queen Anne. We even call it a Queen Anne stick style. Again, the very characteristic of the up in the top gable up there, the sunburst design. And also you take a look on the smaller gable in the front, the projecting bay window, all the bracketry that was added on. All the forms are very organic with the flowers and leaves. But this house in particular has what we call a classic revival porch. So you have the Ionic capped columns, the rounded porch, and some of the Italianate bracketry that's underneath there. But this became very popular after the World's Fair. This porch in particular was probably added around 1903, 1904. The Chicago World's Fair was 1894. Next, or 1892. Next. The prairie style became very popular in the 1900s, the 1920s. And, you know, in this particular home, you ended up getting the wider overhangs. You know, the window proportions really changed. They became smaller. They still were paired or tripled up. The bay window that was still popular from the Victorian period was kind of modified to add more light and also to fenestrate the house a little differently. But this is next to the Community Foundation on North 2nd Street. It's really a beautiful, you know, prairie style home. Next. They also use a brick and stucco. This is another prairie style home, but it was also influenced by the classic revival. And you know, the brick there is a Roman brick, very long and narrow, very thin lines in the mortar joints. But when you look at the dormer up on top, classic revival all the way with a detailing. And the use of even the windows, the classic design of the trim details. And in this particular case, the borrowing of so-called, I'll say, Spanish style with the clay tile roof that also became very popularized. So here again, a mix of styling and the use of materials. Next. Also the rusticated stone on the bottom there, at the base there. That was another way of kind of giving a strength and vitality to the foundation of a house. The Romanesque period had previous influences there. And so when you get into the finer materials on the upper part of the house, there's a nice change of texture on the home design. Next. Here's a nice, really Spanish revival that was popular really from the, I'll say it should be the I'll say the 1920s that it came about. I'll have to change that in our slide. Sorry for that. But you know, here the use of stucco, the use of clay tile, and really the arching of the windows, you know, and also the fenestration up on the parapet up there, and the use of some classic, really, I'll say, balusters up there. So again, a little mixing and matching, and you end up getting the veranda on the left-hand side there. You know, that was enclosed for an enclosed porch, and the colors there, very reminiscent of the Spanish Revival period. Next. And the colonial Georgian style, colonial became very popularized. You know, really, I'll say more so in the 1920s, and but it also showed up, you know, after the 1900s. You know, there was an interest in the Williamsburg, you know, revival and restoration, you know, that ended up impacting a lot of people and bringing that style back. You know, very, I'll say, you know, the square block, you know, very symmetrical, and all the openings to the house as well in the dormer. Next. And here's another colonial style you know, with again the symmetry, you know, the front entryway, which was really characterized by the use of columns, the pediment design. In this particular case, the arching of the pediment over the entryway, the coins on the corners, and then sometimes they had the dentils along the underside of the eave, which is another characteristic. And you can see up in the dormer where they put a lot of detail in the pilasters that frame the windows. And the pediment up there was really a return to the classic revival period, which is, you know, of how we, you know, really got the colonial design was really from the Greek and Roman times. Next. And then we ended up getting into the Romanesque revival, very popular from the 1900s, 1920s. And I'm saying 1920s all the way to the 1930s. When the Depression hit, we hardly had any homes built in Rockford in that part of the decade. But you can see the stone arch at the entryway there, the rusticated stone, and even the arching window up in the attic. But these are all things that you know, were part of the Romanesque revival that was very popular in the period. Next. And then the American Craftsman and the bungalows became very popular in the 1900s and 1920s, and they really ended up having a continued revival later on. If it wouldn't have been for the really the Depression, I think it would have carried on. But when you see how the low slung roof, and really kind of a story and a half, and the bracketry on the outriggers, really on the overhangs, the use of rusticated stone, and really the use of the porches became that outdoor living space that was so important. A lot of times the heavier columns out there to kind of give the mass to the space. And in this case, because of the heavy rusticated stone, the massing of the columns and those kinds of details, it wouldn't look right if it just had like a 4x4 post on it. It would look pretty, I'll say, very weakened in terms of its appearance. You can also notice up in the dormer up there, the way they did the ventilation up there, and really those attention to details really made the design of the house so unique and so you know, popular. Next. And in this particular house, you really got to look very closely. That this used to be one big open wide porch, but underneath the eave line, there's a big, huge, long sweeping arch that they filled in. And a lot of times, sometimes we ended up disrespecting what the original design was, you know, where you could end up doing that with a different tone of color to kind of still emphasize that was very much of an architectural feature with that big arching beam that really defined the home. And certainly the outriggers and the brackets, and even the dormer there, a much wider dormer than normal, all provided you know, some of these design elements. Very simple design, but also something that was very stated. You can see the brackets there for window boxes that they've since taken off. Again, part of really creating part of the architecture and the bringing of nature closer to the home. Next. And then the bungalow, this is a pretty simple version of that, you know, the story and a half where they use the attic for, you know, bedroom space, simple porch, and it's kind of like a gambrel type roof, you know, where they would top off the front to kind of really change the gable to a different design, which really helped define that bungalow feature and ideal. Next. And then the American Foursquare, which, you know, is a very simple square box and very symmetrical. The various porches that were put on, in this case, using the rusticated stone and the bigger square columns that would kind of frame the house. There were a lot of different varieties of these here in Rockford and different, you know, styling of that. but they also had a typical on the top up there, one dormer. That would be, again, symmetrical with the rest of the house. Next. And then we get into the Tudor revival and the use of the half timber. And, this is very popular with I'll say the English style. And, everybody had during all these different periods of architectural styling, they typically, as you can see, from decade to decade, or they kind of span into 2 decades. But one thing or another popularized it, and it kind of swept across the country. And it's the latest and greatest, and a lot of that was done through the different magazines, whether it be Architectural Record or a Reader's Digest or Look magazine. I mean, there were all kinds of ways to kind of popularize these styles and say, I got to have the latest and greatest. Here, the use of stone surrounding the window or door openings, intermixing, and you get a little bit of the Romanesque arch there at the entryway, and how they've articulated the different layers of brick. And also the multi windows. You got 3-bay, you got 2-bay, single bay, and also the half timber, which was emphasized sometimes underneath the windows, or the real squiggly line, I'll call it, up there in the gable end. Again, providing a little bit of variety, and also on how the roof was shaped differently, and cutting off some of the roof or making a gable end on the one end. Had very little big roof overhangs on these particular styles. Next. And this one I wanted to kind of point out, this was a half timber Tudor as well, but they really changed the materials on the very top, which was not that originally. But the one thing I want to kind of point out in the slate roofs, this is how much they really paid attention to detail, where they'd use the bigger shingle at the bottom, and then they would graduate that up to the very top, so that you would end up having this perspective where
wait, I might be able to do it.
A receding perspective on the thing. And so those are the attention to details that they would end up paying. Next. Then we got into the 1940s and the Cape Cod. We started rebuilding again. Certainly after the war, we did do a lot of building during the war here in Rockford, but when it did come back, it was all about simplifying the home. The Victorian or even the Craftsman style were now reduced to a much simpler form. We call it the old salt box. That was very popular in Cape Cod at the time, and had been there for a long time, but somehow or another it grabbed the attention of everybody in the country here of how can we end up giving a little style to an economical home to build for families, because there was a huge housing shortage after the war and the beginning of the baby boomers. But again, characterized by a central entry point with window basically on either side. The roof was pretty plain, and there were no overhangs on the house. Later on, as these homes were expanded, they ended up having a detached garage and a breezeway. And in many cases, it was only a single car garage. Next. And then we get into the ranch, that I think a lot of us all are familiar with. But it started off with a single car garage, and then it became a 2-car garage, but a 1-story home, kind of sprawling design. And, with more or less could be an entry that came off the center part of the house, no symmetry typically with the home. And sometimes it was next to the garage where the entryway was. Next. And the roof styles were typically 3-in-1. Here's another ranch style, but modified, more, I'll say, paying a little bit more respect to maybe a colonialized style with a higher roof. Certainly, the big shutters on the windows there were very reminiscent of a colonial style. But again, I think you can see how a lot of different styles were influenced by earlier periods, and what people in particular liked or what their builder liked to do. Next. Another ranch here, the same characteristics, a very simple, again, very asymmetrical. Next. The same thing here with a single family car garage, and also the introduction of higher windows in a bedroom to provide privacy and limit the window openings. Sometimes these were sliders, sometimes these were awning windows, but it was, again, a different way to kind of stylize. And in this particular case, the garage was still subservient to the home. And where today the garage is front and center, where we would call them sometimes a snout house, where the garage is right up in front and the house is towards the back. In fact, sometimes it's kind of hard to find where the entryway is. Next. And then the Lustron prefabricated steel home that was very popular right after the war. There were like 2,200 of these that were built. 26 of them found their way to Rockford, Illinois. And they were made of porcelainized steel panels. Everything was steel, including the interior walls, all the cabinetry, the kitchen cabinets, the built-in dressers and drawers, everything was steel. And there wasn't a stick of wood in any of these homes. And the roof was even a porcelainized shingle roof. But there's still quite a few of these still in Rockford, some of them put in rolling green, but scattered throughout the community. Next. And then we get into kind of a mix, what I call a mixed architectural styling. And this is very classic, where you have, really what we would call a prairie style, but also the introduction of some of the Queen Anne elements, the bay window, the underneath the bay window there's the sheet metal application of a very organic design. The brackets underneath the eave were all borrowed from the Italianate period, and the porch almost lends itself to the classic revival. So you got a real mix here of all kinds of things that the original owner decided that they wanted in their house. Next. And here's another one where, this is kind of the mid-century. You got the single car garage, you got the arched, entryway, the 3-bay window with a single bay up on the attic, the real steep roofs. Again, this was very popular in this particular style, really in the 1940s and 50s here in Rockford. And even in the 1920s, there were different versions of this with, I'll say, a far more architectural detailing than what you see here that began in the 1940s. Next. And also you can kind of see, the Georgian or the colonial style here, lots of windows in this particular case. I think one of the things here about the main entryway, the curved stairs made out of brick, and also the brick detailing above the door entryway, which is kind of highly unusual. Was this person a mason, or the mason wanted to kind of do something for the owner? You never know what some of the motivation was, but again, the minimal amount of overhang, again, probably to cut costs. But again, these kinds of designs, were popularized or modified as the particular owner wanted to kind of show off what they could do for maybe lower cost. Next. And then some of the chimneys, I just wanted to kind of show, how ornate these were, the use of chimney pots in some of the homes. This one's pretty much covered up by a lot of landscaping. Next. And that's it. So, Sarah?
Wonderful. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. And there was a comment here in the chat, Gary. It says there's a neighborhood of the Lustron homes in Mount Morris near the old publishing company sites.
There were, I think, around 17 Lustron houses in that community, in that little community. So again, that particular style and the availability of it took the town by storm. So.
And then my question is, why should people care about this for their neighborhoods? What benefit is it to their neighborhood to understand and know their history, architectural styles? What would you say?
Well, you know, in most communities, architectural style does have a value. And, you know, people value, you know, what the period of the home, when it was built, what it represented at the time. And I think that, you know, we have always kind of stated, well, it's colonial. Well, I remember back in the 50s, everything was colonial, or it was old. And, you know, we weren't sophisticated enough, I guess, to understand what building architectural styles were and how important they were in the development of our community. You know, I think one of the things, I live in Haight Village. It's a virtual laboratory of architectural styles. You can see homes built from the 1840s to the 1950s, and you could see every decade of an architectural period. And again, you know, how we have really transferred that to other neighborhoods as they grew, and when those were particular neighborhoods were subdivided, you know, what were the popular styles? And I think you can look at the various neighborhoods, the richness of the architectural detailing that gives a home its value, and its uniqueness, that I think we all should be very proud of. So.
Right. So at this time, I'll just turn over the microphone to Chris Kelly, and you are a resident of Churchill's Grove, and you're going to talk a little bit about your experience and how you did your neighborhood history, maybe what encouraged you to do that.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen, but thank you for inviting me to share our experience about this. And my wife is on the call also, in fact, sitting in our living room. So get an actual view of, of what the house looks like. But this is our house at 1523 Harlem Boulevard in Churchill's Grove. We purchased the house in 2019, and you know, we moved from McChesney Park, and you know, love the Churchill's Grove neighborhood. It's a, you know, strong neighborhood with lots of stuff going on, you know, sidewalks and people walking their dogs and running and riding their bikes and things like that. And we closed on the house just before Christmas in 2019, and didn't move in until probably February or March, but we, you know, wanted to get the house painted, some repairs done, and you know, just things like that in time for Christmas, so that we could host the family, you know, holiday stuff there. And you know, one of the things about Churchill's Grove in particular is all just the neighborhood events that the organization puts on, the luminaries, for example, and the neighborhood rummage sale that we had in the springtime, and just the beautiful flowers and trees and things like that happen all throughout the year, not only on, you know, Harlem Boulevard and National Avenue and, you know, Camp and Post and all the main streets, but just all over the neighborhood. It's really a great place to live, and we're really enjoying it. But you know, Heather and I both grew up in old houses. That was my house, and I came from Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and my family house was built in, I think, the 1850s or something like that. And so, you know, I grew up with squeaky floors and, you know, some drafts and noises, and, you know, you hear things. So I'm used to that stuff, and I really like it. You know, the house speaks to us. But we knew that when we bought this house, we wanted to find out more about it. And so we started on the scavenger hunt, and it, you know, remember, this is 2019. And so just before COVID, we were, you know, able to start doing that research. And so some of the used many of the resources and things that Marie was talking about. In fact, Gina Marie really helped us when we went to the library, introduced us to the Sanborn maps, and helped us with the online databases. And you're right, that the news bank, boy, you can go down that rabbit hole all night long if you wanted to. We started at the recorder's office at the Winnebago County, not the clerk, but it's in the same building there on Elm Street. And one of the nice things is that they're able to pull the deeds. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but they're able to pull the deeds for you. You can look through the old microfilm deeds and things like that. And we were able to find all the deeds for the house going back to its very first owner. So that was interesting to find out. The house, so I'll just mention to you, when we bought the house in 2019, the MLS listing indicated it was built in 1900. And it turns out they do that when they're not quite sure when the house was built. They know it's an old house, but maybe they don't want to spend the time doing the research and things, so they just put 1900 there. We found out the house was built in 1910 by Robert E. Doxey, and through the news bank and the help of Jean and Marie, we were able to find this clipping from the Rockford Morning Star from July 10th, 1910. It says, R.E. Doxey will build a new home and Harlem Avenue at once. Contractor Linden secured the contract and expects to start work Tuesday morning. The construction will be of brick with all the modern improvements, and altogether will cost $6,300. So I don't know what modern improvements there were in 1910, but we have electricity and plumbing, so that's cool. So Robert E. Doxey built the house in 1910, lived there until 1912. This is the deed from that, from the purchase of that house. From what we can tell, and R.E.'s mom, his mother, Margaret, actually owned the property, and then in 1910 sold the property, and R.E. Doxey built the house there. And Marie mentioned the city directory is one of the resources that they have at the library. And when we went in, they pulled these things out for us on a cart, and they put us in a room, and they helped us, showed us how to work the city directories. It was super helpful. But we found this listing in the city directory about Robert E. Doxey, his wife Sarah, and there's actually two addresses on here. One is the 1523 Harlem Avenue. It's actually Harlem Boulevard, but it's listed as Avenue here in the city directory. But the other one is 407 East State Street, and it's Shoes. So from what we can tell, it looks like the Doxeys owned a store of some sort, maybe a shoe store, and this was at 407 East State Street, which is across the street from Wired Cafe, where the Chase Bank building is. And this picture came from the Midway Village Museum. We were able to dig that up. Interesting what you find when you go on those scavenger hunts. So anyway, R.E. Doxey built the house in 1910, lived there until 1912. In 1912, he sold the house to Alexander and Margaret Burgess. And they were there, they were there quite a long time, the Burgess family, but Alexander and Margaret owned the house from 1912 to 1933. This is the deed from that sale. And the deed mentions they're selling the property in lot 4, block 16. And so this is the Sanborn map that Marie was mentioning. And we were able to, I've circled there the property between Sheridan and Sherman on Harlem Boulevard, and you can see there, the buildings that are there. The Sanborn maps are actually fire insurance maps, and they list the width of the property, different dimensions of the buildings, the width of the streets, and things like that. So really interesting to look at.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Real quick, where did you get all the deeds to the house? Where did
The
you go to?
deeds came from the recorder's office at the county building.
Okay, thank you.
And it's, when you first walk into that office, they can pull up all the deeds back to 1980, boom, like that, right on the computer. So if you have a house that was built, after 1980, no problem, you can get all your deeds. Anything before that, you have to go into the microfilm. And, it's easy to do. It's not that hard, but it does take a little more work. And it's really kind of fun to spend some time there. I think we went there for 2 days in a row and dug through the microfilms. And, it became a game after a while. You find, you find in the index what you're looking for, and then you go and you pull that reel of microfilm and you just start searching. Some of the older ones can get a little hard to read sometimes, but that's part of the fun of it. So the Burgesses bought the house in 1912. Alexander and Margaret lived there until 1933. and then they sold the house to their daughters, Alice and Blanche Burgess, became trustees. And Alice and Blanche owned the house from 1933 to 1976. Alice passed away, and then Blanche became the owner, and she owned the house until 1980. So the house was in the Burgess family for 68 years. And which was really fortunate, I think, for us. You know, it would not be uncommon for somebody to, you know, to paint the old woodwork in a house or something like that, or to take out built-ins. I mean, that stuff happens, but none of that has happened in our house. And I think in large part because the Burgess family just, you know, occupied the house for so long. So we dug into the Newsbank database and found, you know, Marie mentioned, seemed like the Register Star or the Morning Star would publish just about anything that you sent to them. If your son came to visit for a weekend, they'd put it in the paper. But we discovered that there was a wedding at the property in 1913. I'm envisioning this, you know, this bridal party happening in the backyard. Which was cool because just last summer our daughter got married and we had her shower in the backyard, so that was kind of reminiscent. There was an open house at the property in 1932 with Mr. and Mrs. Alex Burgess at 1523 Harlem Boulevard. And so we just searched the address in Newsbank, and you know, that alone pulled up a lot of these news articles. We learned that the house had been a polling place. This one's from 1955 and again in 1965. So photos of what, you know, it's kind of hard to tell from the pictures and how they reproduced, but you know, we're assuming that this is a photo of these, you know, neighborhood ladies running the polling place and as election judges in 1965. So after Blanche passed away in 1980. The house was sold, and Gregory Potter purchased the house. He lived there until 1983. He sold to Raymond and Janet Rice. They were there until 1986. And then it was purchased by Robert and Mary Wagness. They lived there from 1986 to 1990. And then Thomas and Lydia Ogilvy owned the house from 1990 to 2015. So they were there for 25 years. Matthew and Sarah Brenner then purchased the house in 2015. They were there for a couple of years. And then from 2017 to 2019, it was owned by Stephen and Andrea Jensen. They ended up, they didn't live in the house, they rented it out, and then we purchased the house when they sold it in 2019. So again, you know, we were able to find all of these deeds and some interesting information from Newsbank and other places. It was just a lot of fun to do this kind of research. And it was really simple to do. Lots of different places you can go. Marie touched on a lot of them. And, you know, just dig into that information. It's available in a lot of places. And all I can say is, you know, if this is interesting to you, just dig in and follow the information. It's just a lot of fun to do. You learn a lot about your property and understand, you know, the place where, you know, I sit on my couch and watch TV and I'm thinking, you know, Alex Burgess sat in the same place 100 years ago. It's kind of fun. Or somebody walked up these same stairs. And that's interesting to think about. So again, you know, thank you for inviting me to share the history of our house.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Very, very interesting. That was really cool to see. We are at 1:07, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But what I will do is I'll work with both Chris and Marie, and any links that are available that you can access first without a library card, I'll get those together and then let you know the links that you would need with a library card. I also put in our chat the link to get a library card. So if you don't have one, please do, so you can access these really great resources. But I will make sure I send those out along with the replay of this video for today. So for the sake of time, if anybody has any other questions for any of the speakers, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me. I feel I emailed most everybody here to let you know about the Zoom link. So yeah, reach out to me and I'll make sure any of your questions get answered. And yeah, we appreciate you guys joining us today. We thank you so much. Again, thank you to our speakers, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.